Welcome, everybody, to today's episode here on Wisdom Cafe of Meet the Author. This is episode 21, and my name is Bob Choat. I'm the Transformational Grandmaster, and my beautiful co-host is Sofie Nubani, the queen of laughter and wisdom. And by the way, that is going through a transition because she is progressing and even rising higher. So, Sofie, how's it there on the southeast coast of the United States?
Sunny and warm.
Sunny and warm. Yeah, and it is sunny and warm here on the west coast of the United States, here in the Los Angeles area. And our guest, who's the author of this amazing book, A Recovering Politician's Guide to Christian Living, which sounds pretty awesome. In fact, he talks about there are no politics in heaven, and we're going to get further into that. And our guest, so Thomas Russo, Mr. Russo, should I say, he currently serves as a town manager in Newton, New Jersey, and he's been there 11 years, his dedicated service. But here's the thing. He has run for politics. He's been interested in politics. And as I talked to him, he was actually popped out of the womb just doing a whole politician thing.
Right. I knew you were going to use that against me. I knew it. Well, good night, everybody. It's been fun. I want to thank our sponsors, and good night. No?
So he's actually been involved in governmental activities for quite some time, starting from his mid-20s on up, and just involved in a professional level, but also dedicated years before that in wanting to understand the aspects of politics, and as well as how governments are run and so forth. And he continues that service for many decades now. I think at least for 2.5 decades, continuing that. And there's so much more that I can say about him. He's been involved in really helping to make a difference. But I'm really interested in getting his insights on politics and how he was able to transform out of that. So I want to welcome Thomas Russo Jr. here to Wisdom Cafe Live, Meet the Author. So, Thomas, welcome.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Sofie.
Thomas, welcome, and very nice to have you, and for you to give us some of your quality time, because I know you've been very busy, and you've been one of the first responders. You've always been working. A lot of people been a lot off and trying to figure out things while you're there in front line doing things and committed and in service. So thank you for that. And
also, thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I want to also thank you for your professionalism. And I truly admire that about you. I've known you through Twitter and LinkedIn, and I know you do a lot of speaking engagements. Mm-hmm. You do consulting work, and I'm very impressed with your style and your delivery and your transformation. And I'm very happy to have you share a lot of great value and tips to our audience today on things that could really enlighten and empower, encourage their journey, especially through what we're going through at this time, and how you were able to truly adjust in such times and still be in that service. But I know your experience has probably helped you a lot to be able to give that to others. So welcome again on Wisdom Cafe Live, Meet the Author,
yes.
And we are very happy to have you.
Thank you. And one thing I want to say, because I'm jealous because everybody else has cool nicknames and titles, so I just came up with 2 for myself that I'm going to throw out there.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'm doing it. Emperor of Empowerment. I like that one. Or the Sultan of Spirituality. Awesome. So I'm going with either one of those tonight, Bob. So If you can update the
Emperor of
graphic for me,
Empowerment and
update the graphic, Bob. Let's do it.
so the Emperor of Empowerment and the
Wow,
Sultan
that is
of
really
Spirituality.
That might require 90 minutes of conversation tonight.
We are so very honored to have the truly most important guest of the night.
Oh my God.
Very creative.
There she goes.
Very creative. No, that's very creative. Did you see how fast you were? And
I'm the bishop of bandwidth, Sofie. So I got the bandwidth. So let's do this, Bob. Let's go.
The Sultan of Spirituality.
Oh my God. It's been a long 6 minutes so far. That's all I'm saying, but that's fine.
Hey.
Who's counting? I'm not counting. Who's counting?
See, Sofie, he's good at improv, so Second City is waiting for him too.
Oh, I wish. Oh yeah. Oh, I'm good at. Oh yeah. Don't get me started. I won't stop. So we should get back to the topic at hand. I don't want to bore the audience with my wit and wisdom. So let's talk politics, Bob. Come on, give me a tough one. Come on, let's go right into it. Let's talk about the two things that nobody likes to talk about: politics and religion. I mean, let's do it.
There you go. Right. Yeah, and here you are involved in both, and we will be bringing out that aspect.
Sour and sweet. Here we go.
But this interesting insight on you regarding your improbabilities is amazing. Have you thought about going into that direction at all, or something? So
quick story, or not so quick because we're killing time for 60 minutes. So when I was a child, I was obese. And so I spent most of my childhood being made fun of and, last to be picked for the games and the whole routine. So between sophomore year and junior year of high school, I starved myself and I lost about 100 pounds, which not a great strategy. But unfortunately, when I lost the weight and went back to school my junior year, everybody was nice to me because now I gave them a facade that they were happy with. And it was a sad lesson for me as a child at age 16. But one of the things I did from a practical standpoint in high school was I got involved in forensics public speaking. And so one of the things and you talk about improv, so it wasn't really improv, but it was called extemporaneous speaking. And they would give you, and I know this is a little boring, but they would give you several topics and you had a certain amount of minutes where you had to do your research based on materials you brought to the conference. You had to write your speech, you had to memorize your speech, and then you had to deliver your speech in front of 3 judges. And that's how I learned to think on my feet.
Wow.
And so in hindsight, and then I did debate at college at George Mason for the first year of my collegiate endeavors, and we were one of the top teams in the country. And it's like I forced myself to get out of my shell because I had been so, emotional. I had suffered such emotional abuse as a child through my interaction with people that I knew, and I wasn't a great athlete. I was a good athlete, but I wasn't great. So I knew my intellect was the thing that needed to carry me through my interaction with people. And so whether it was spending, most of my time in the library or, memorizing the Guinness Book of World Records, the World Almanac, I used to read the encyclopedia A to Z, no joke, because I wanted to be, a repository of knowledge and wisdom and information, because that was the way I was going to level the playing field if I couldn't compete with people either by looks or because of my weight or economically. I would always be able to match wits and intellect with people. So, nice. Going back to age 16, I've always been able to think and process and be able to write speeches and kind of be a linear thinker, A to Z. I think in bullet points. I always think, main topic, bullet points, conclusion. So, I know you said it kind of as a joke, but that's kind of how I trained my brain back when I was a kid to think. And and the humor to me, especially right now, I'm a town manager running a town during pandemic and protests. Like right now, we're planning for 3 protests in the next week in the town. Wow. And obviously, I've been running the town since March under the guise of a pandemic, executive orders, social distancing, businesses that are closed. So this has been the hardest time to be a government official without exception. I tell people this is like Y2K meets 9/11 meets a snowstorm meets a hurricane all in one. That's what it's like right now being an elected official, or for me being a town manager. Very difficult.
Wow.
It's a very difficult time right now.
I can
Yeah,
imagine.
I can imagine, like with what's like New Jersey, because it besides New York, New Jersey was one of the hardest hits in terms of the cases regarding COVID, and then we had the economy, which has been hurt really bad, and now with the riots and protesters and everything, and dealing with that, and to me, because I liken it to like 3 different Hollywood movies coming together all at one time, and that's probably what you're experiencing as a town manager.
Yeah, everything's converging at once, and normally you have the luxury of, okay, it's Hurricane Sandy, or it's a snowstorm, or it's Y2K, or it's 9/11. Like, it's kind of a snapshot in time. Right now, everything is overlapping. So you have this pandemic, and New Jersey is the second hardest hit next to New York, right? So we have that interplay. You have businesses that are closed. You have, and I have a downtown, so I worry, what does my downtown look like 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, or a year from now, right? And then you add these protests, and I support free speech. I support protesters if they're nonviolent and they're just looking to advocate their perspective, whether I agree or disagree. To me, freedom of speech doesn't cut one way; it cuts both ways, right? So you have to be willing to allow people to express themselves, even if you disagree with it. This isn't Nazi Germany. This isn't Russia. This is a country where we want to have dialogue, and we want to share ideas, because that's how growth occurs in society, right? So people need to, I think, get off their high horse and say, look, whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, or whether Black Lives Matter, or whatever the group is, you need to be willing to listen, because if we tune all these groups out, then we're just as ignorant as the people we criticize, and then we make no progress as a society. And that's the danger that we're in right now. So yeah, I'm working with the other town officials in the police department and others to say, hey, if people come to Newton on tomorrow, like we're expecting, or Saturday or Tuesday, then give them a forum, give them a voice, treat them with respect, and then let them go home safely. And then there's another day to do other things. You know what I mean? Like, this is what we do. This is government's job, whether you like government or not, or like law enforcement or not. Our job is to maintain law and order and a civil society. And somehow we've lost that civility in politics and in government and in life. And I know you guys are very, into spirituality and things like law of attraction. And if we're going to just keep putting this negative energy out there, that's all we're just going to get. We're just going to get more negative energy. We're going to get more riots. We're going to get more, people suffering. And maybe we all need to take a pause and take a breath and take a step back and really see, what's underlying the angst and the disagreements and the things that are going on, because there's something behind it. It's, what happened to George Floyd was a travesty, but there's things behind that, whether it's, training and use of force for law enforcement, whether it's economic disadvantage, whether it's our education system, whether it's the fact that, and I've been saying this for 30 years, depending on what zip code you live in New Jersey, that is almost the determining factor for your success in your life. Because if you grew up in Short Hills or Bridgewater or Basking Ridge or Sparta, and that's your zip code, your trajectory will be very different than if you live in Camden or Patterson or Newark. But some people don't like to say that truth, but it's the truth. So how do we equalize the playing field? And I'm not saying you disadvantage one group or another. I'm saying, how do you bring about opportunity? Because when there's no hope, that's when despair comes in, and that's when anger comes in, and that's when rioting and all the lawlessness comes. Because in the end, what's underneath it all is they're scared and they don't have hope for a better future. I agree. Yeah. We need to find that hope for people, and we need to help them find it, regardless of their color. That's what's missing right now.
Yeah, one of the things, and I'm glad that you brought this up, because I see the same thing here on the West Coast. I think we can go to any community across the United States and we can see the differences. Like here in Los Angeles, if you grew up in an area, so for example, here in the San Fernando Valley where I live, and even this part of Los Angeles is split between the West Valley and East Valley. If you grew up in the East Valley, you're not going to have as much chance as if you grew up on the West Valley or in the South side of the valley. So, and in Los Angeles, you have South LA, which is there's nothing there. And I actually, years ago, when me and Lori, we were working together regarding nutrition, everything, and I went to do some research down in South LA and Crenshaw and those areas, and just looking for just nutrition, and there was no fresh veggies at all anywhere in any one of the stores there. None, zero.
Wow.
And
you know, being an expert in that field, and you know, Dr. Lori Shemmick's a mutual friend. If you're not getting proper rest, if you're not getting proper nutrition, if you're eating processed food, you're intaking too much salt, sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and you know, you're the expert, but you're not giving your body the nutrients it needs, whether it's mentally or physically. So
exactly,
it's another disadvantage, right, that people go through. So yeah, we could attack this issue from so many different angles, but
so many different angles. Yeah, and again, I've looked at it from like going down there and looking at it, and then also looking at it, having been with the LAPD as a police officer many years ago, and seeing the perspective of what law enforcement officers go, and then I look at what law enforcement officers, and I was able to look at what happened with George Floyd and what that officer did, and to me, it didn't make any sense why the officer did that, having been in law enforcement.
Yeah, and you know, I used to work at the sheriff's office for 4 years. I was a civilian, but I was a public information officer, and obviously now I'm the town manager. So I have the officers, you know, work for me, right? So I know in New Jersey, we're fortunate that we have a very progressive attorney general who is the first Sikh American attorney general in the history of the United States, Gurbir Grewal.
Awesome,
and he's great, and he's he's a nice man. He's intelligent. He's forward thinking. And so, you know, I trust his leadership because, you know, our directives and policies and procedures obviously come from attorney general guidelines through prosecutors' offices to the local police departments. And so, you know, and, you know, not to spend too much time on the minutia, but, you know, in New Jersey, you have towns that are civil service and you have towns that are not. So as a civil service community, my hands are tied in terms of who I can hire. So if your police department doesn't reflect, and you know, whether people like to admit this or not, I'm just going to be truthful. If your police department doesn't reflect the diversity of your community, you're going to have a problem, right? Because if you have 24 white officers and 40% of your town is African American or Latino, there's going to be a gap. I'm not saying you can't overcome it, but there's going to be a challenge, whether it's language or whether it's culture, or, you know, right? There's going to be a challenge to that. And so there's a limitation with who I can hire as a police department. And that's unfortunate because I'd love to have more minorities, more women, members of the LGBTQ community. Like I don't have that because I can't go outside the bounds of, you know, working off and, you know, you were in law enforcement, working off a list. You know, you got to take the test. You know, a lot of people spend thousands of dollars on test preparation. A lot of the minority communities, these individuals don't have $2,000 to spend on test preparation. So right out of the gate, they're at a disadvantage that they're never going to get to the top of the list, and they're never going to get hired by a police department like mine, right? So who suffers? The community suffers. I suffer as an employer, and they suffer as a potential employee. So the hiring practices in these towns need to be changed. And then, as you know, you hire somebody. What's your training? What's your use of force policy? You know, are you diligent? I mean, you know, you can't have officers, and I don't know if this is true of one of the officers in Minneapolis, but you can't have officers with, you know, a dozen transgressions or, you know, a dozen issues in their jacket or their file. Like maybe you need to discipline your officers. Maybe unions need to be understanding that sometimes you need to fire an employee if they're not able to abide by certain policies and procedures. And, you know, we don't like to say that, but maybe not everybody's meant to be a police officer. You know, you need a certain disposition, you need a certain skill set, and it's not an easy career. So you know,
that's true. And
right?
one of the things, yes, one of the things that when I, as a police officer, because we went to psychological testing,
Sure.
fast forward, because my background in psychology now,
Mm.
after having to go through a doctoral program in that, and looking at the testing that's done to measure or to look at a person's personality is flawed, and that needs to be changed.
Right. So,
And
and like I said, I don't want to go too far into this, but think about it. So we're
yeah,
talking about testing, hiring,
yes,
psychological, training, and then obviously training every year, accountability,
yep, yep,
discipline. Like this is not a simple fix. This is a multi-layered thing. But like I said,
yes,
I can't speak to what they do in other states, but I know in New Jersey, the Attorney General is very serious about having the right policies and procedures and holding local law enforcement accountable. You have to.
yep.
Thomas, with your position and your expertise, do you feel that cross-culture intelligence is very important in part of the teachings, because it will really minimize a lot of misunderstandings, because when people understand a culture concept,
Mm-hmm.
immediately the wall starts dissolving in guarding, and then now they open up in a different way together. And another thing I wanted to ask also, do you feel that adding something like a laughter mindset program to those organizations would kind of loosen up the tension that they are living day to day because of the strength of their responsibilities and what they deal with on daily basis?
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, the issue is all the things that I mentioned and the fact that you can't have it that your interaction as a white police officer with an African-American man is during a time of crisis. Like that can't be your first interaction, because there's no understanding, there's no comfort, there's no trust, right? So that's why in at least our police department, and I know in others in New Jersey, community relations and the community policing is huge. So, and people may minimize it, but things like coffee with a cop, or we do ice cream in the summer, we do cone with a cop, having a school resource officer, doing programs with senior citizens, doing programs with community groups, Rotaries, Kiwanis, ethnic groups. Like you need to get your police officers into the community on a daily basis, so that when a crisis hits, it's easier to de-escalate the situation rather than escalate the situation. And that's what's missing in a lot of these towns. Like you can't walk into a tense situation if you don't know, you don't know the pastors, you don't know the business owners, you don't know the parents. You need to build that rapport on a daily basis, because that builds credibility and accountability and trust. So yeah, whether it's the laughter mindset or other types of programs, you got to be doing that every day. And it's not just, the town manager, it's elected officials, it's the police chief, all the way down to the new patrolman. Everybody's got to be in that boat. Otherwise, some cultures just don't trust government officials. They don't trust law enforcement, right? Some cultures are the opposite. They're very respectful. They have an understanding. But unless you have an understanding of the culture that you're dealing with, you can't paint everybody with a broad brush. There's too many brushes, right? There's too many ethnicities, languages, cultures, genders, sexual orientations. Like, so you need to be respectful, but you need to be open to say, hey, I don't know everything, but I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to learn and I'm going to share, because that's how we're going to make this better one day at a time. But it takes a lot of effort, but the results, you can't put a price tag on the results. You know what the price tag is? The death of an African-American man because he had a knee to his throat for 8 minutes. We can't afford that. Law enforcement, and, we can talk about sports. We can talk about what I do, teaching, writing a book, other things. But there's no margin for error in law enforcement, because it's like life and death. Error in law enforcement is death. That's not a margin of error that we can afford anymore, regardless of ethnicity or the race. So we need to do a better job across the board and build relationships, because we can't afford any more dead Americans. I don't care what color they are, or dead people. We got to look at this from a humanistic perspective.
Amen.
Forget the titles. People are suffering and communities are suffering right now because some police departments didn't do this work up front, because it's hard and it's not easy, and maybe they're uncomfortable with it, but we have to do it.
I agree. There needs to be a big shift. And years ago, I had talked about this, and I remember having been with LAPD and looking at from that perspective and how. So one of the things, and this is back then, but I'm sure it hasn't really changed until unless officers themselves, but also the leaders within all the way up to the police chief, encourage their officers to get out, like you said, to get out to meet the community. Because here's the thing. As a law enforcement officer, when we did not go out and meet the community, when we only met the community when we were engaged in law enforcement, when we're making an arrest. So we were arresting bad guys. So we make a judgment. Then we talked amongst ourselves. We talk shop. We get off duty. We go to a bar. We get drunk and we talk shop. So like our downtime was not like with the fire department. They usually will have a, like if there's a critical incident, their downtime, they would talk amongst themselves at the station, and they would have somebody to help them. Our downtime was going to a local bar and dealing with a critical incident that way. And then our only interactions really affected our mind. And that thing was that there's good guys and bad guys. We're the good guys. Everybody else is the bad guys. And that became the mindset. And I've been telling law enforcement officers, police officers, sheriff's deputies, get outside. Go out there, talk to the people, get involved in the community. And I agree with you, Thomas. That was perfect. What you said. Get out there and just really associate. Get to know the people, even off duty. Get to know them.
And that's the virtue.
To see and to hear Thomas speak, actually, and I think a lot of our viewers can truly feel uplifted with his insights, suggestions, and to also know his feedback about the state general attorney of Jersey. That's really, I mean, I'm very happy that we are having those kind of conversations, because with everything that's going on and with facts that we're living, we cannot deny that, and we got to be realistic. We need solutions. We need solutions that work. We need to think holistic thinking, beyond and above, like he mentioned, being human. And those are steps that gets us closer to solutions that make sense and have less damage and more lives, saved and so forth. So that's awesome.
And by the way, I had a Davey Williams. He said, "Great question." And Sofie then later he said, "We need community interdependency, no doubt."
Amen.
And an error perspective with law enforcement. Love the points.
And just one last point on the topic is, the virtue of running a smaller police department is we have that flexibility, right? And we have a smaller town, right? But whether it's Newton, New Jersey or Newark, the principle's the same. It's, officers getting out of patrol cars. It's having cops that walk the beat. It's having bicycle patrols in the summer. It's officers going to the Chamber of Commerce event. It's officers walking into businesses saying, "Hey, how are things going?" And they know people by their first name, the mom and pop shop and everything like that. You can do that in a town of 8,000. You could do it in a city of 8 million. It's the same principle. It's just building that relationship, trust, and rapport. And that's what's missing in a lot of these departments. And like you said, you don't want the first interaction to be when they're putting handcuffs on somebody or when they're arresting somebody or they pulled somebody over, because everybody's defenses are already up, right? The person in the car, the alleged person who committed a crime, right, allegedly or whatever, the officer already has a certain myopic thinking of this is what I'm encountering, or this is what you are, or who you are. And you need to minimize those distractions and those walls before you get to the point of a George Floyd or somebody gets pulled over or whatever. And that's what's missing. And, we're going to do our part in Newton. I just pray that other cities use this as a wake-up call to, really look at their policies and procedures, look at their hiring practices, and really, we're all in the same boat here. Like, And that's why I use the word humanistic or human. Forget the labels, and Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, but understand what's behind that perspective, that certain groups have been oppressed. They feel oppressed. They feel hopeless. How can we all bring hope to the people we encounter? And that's, that's my spirit. And that's the blessing of becoming a born again Christian 5 years ago. I'm able to incorporate my faith and my spirituality into my public service in a way that I never really was able to 10, 20 years ago. And that's why my perspective now is so different than it was previously. That's been a blessing for me. And, that's why I wrote the book.
Yes,
and by the way, Thomas, Davey Williams says, as a Philly guy, love seeing a New Jersey guy bring in this perspective.
Thank you, David. I just hope he's not an Eagles fan, a Flyers fan, or, I don't want to go down that road. I just don't want to go down that road. But thank you, sir.
Well, so he says, very refreshing interview. You guys rock. And by the way, he's an author as well and a golf pro down in Florida now.
Cool.
So,
yeah,
he's down in South Florida.
Well, Davey, I'm just going to say thank you and stay tuned, because Bob and Sophie and I are going to do this every week now, because this is the new format for the program. So I'm excited. So this is
love it. We need to center and be diversified, and
that's right.
Truly, in fact, in my upcoming book, Optimize Your Creative Mindset, I have a chapter that is designed and designated for a circle of creative masters. And it is along with those concepts where we do bring that diversity, because once we're able to really have that different vision and outlooks to life from different individuals, backgrounds, cultures, religions, that's when we can unite strong.
Right.
And truly, like, hey, we're human. You're human too, and I love you, and everything. It's like, what was all those stories about, and why did we, all these years believe that, and we're fighting each other versus like, my God, you're so nice. I wish I was able to open up and be this person with you a long time before, for example. So there you go.
Think of the time and the energy that's lost, like you just described, and think of missing out on relationships and opportunities. I mean, life is short, and I come from a Christian worldview, but regardless of your faith or religion or spiritual background, practically speaking, life is a blink of an eye. And I start my day with prayer and everything, and I always say, if I'm alive, there's a reason why I'm here today. So I need to bring love to the people I interact with. And whether that's my employees, the public, my spouse, my kids, my parents, and I wrote about it in a book. You got two choices. You got love and you got fear. So whichever one you put out into the universe is coming back to you, right? I mean, not just karmically speaking, but that's what you're going to see more of. That's what you're going to foster. That's what you're going to grow. Yep. And I just learned to say, you know what? I choose love. And trust me, it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do if you're getting yelled at as an elected official or a government official, or if you're a law enforcement officer or a business person and you have unhappy customers, whatever it is. People have this misperception of religion and spirituality that once you find faith, you find perfection and nirvana, and everything is, flowers and, music and, dancing cherubs. And that sounds great, but it's not reality. There will be pain. There will be death. You will lose your job. You will have financial situations. You will have to deal with alcoholism, affairs, drugs, because it's life. Like, this is the world we live in, because a lot of those things that I just mentioned happen because lack of love, lack of parenting, lack of community support. Like, when you bring the negativity, that's what happens. So I implore all the listeners and people watching, start rethinking your interaction with the people around you, whether it's the grocery clerk, the truck driver, the Amazon delivery person, or people that you encounter in the workplace, because you don't know what other people are going through. And this is coming from a guy who suffered from anxiety and depression and thoughts of suicide years ago. And faith was the thing that got me out of my darkest time and my darkest moments. And now I get to coach. Sorry.
Yeah. But by the way, Davey says bingo.
Well, I think Davey's still reeling because I think he's fans of all the teams that I mentioned from Philly. So I have a feeling we're going to be muting Davey shortly because he's going to get into an argument with me about some sports team. But
well,
whatever.
so here's the thing. He said before bingo, he said again, typical friggin' Jersey taking over. LOL.
Davey, it's what we do, and Davey, I know where you live, so you better calm down there, Davey. Okay. No, just kidding, Davey. I love you, Davey. I need to practice what I preach. I love you too. See, I told you it's not easy, right? I mean, I gotta love Eagles fans and Flyers fans. Wait.
So you're a recovering politician.
Yes.
You know, you found Christian living, but you're recovering. Tell us about being a politician and then recovering from it.
So, as I said, when we were talking offline, so for some reason out of the womb, I was interested in politics, right? So I said when kids were using coloring books, I was coloring electoral college maps, trying to figure out if Florida was a red state or a blue state. Okay. So, and my family wasn't really politically active to say, well, my parents were involved. Although later in life, I found out that my grandfather was very active in Hoboken and Jersey City politics, and I just really didn't know that story or know that side of him as much as I wish I knew. Frank Sinatra grew up across the street from my grandmother's house, and we have great stories about Frank Sinatra and my relatives and, a lot of those things. But politics was just something I gravitated towards. And as a kid growing up in the early 80s, I gravitated, Republican. I gravitated towards Tom Kaine, who was our governor, who was very well respected, and Ronald Reagan. And I just remember the respect that people gave them because they were seen as leaders and very credible and, good public speakers and the whole thing. So I just gravitated towards public service government. I was, very much into even nonprofits as a kid, like Muscular Dystrophy Association. I remember saving my money when I was a kid, saving my allowance to give it to Jerry Lewis for the MDA telethon back in the day, right? For his annual telethon. So I had this heart for service, and I had this understanding at a young age about the suffering of others. So I don't know if it was, some would say it was, empathic, or it was just this, this desire to alleviate the suffering of others. I had that as a kid. So I naturally gravitated politics probably because of that. And then as time progressed, when I graduated high school, went to college, came back to Rutgers and graduated from Rutgers, all politics is local, like Tip O'Neill used to say. So I got involved with campaigns. I got involved with the Republican Club, the Republican County Committee, and then I ran a friend of mine campaign. He was 31 years old, and I was 22 or however old I was. And, I ran his campaign for town council, and he won. And all I did, it was funny, because all I did was apply the principles of, I ran campaigns in high school. So I was the kid writing speeches, designing flyers, coming up, and, we joked about, the Sultan of Spirituality and the Emperor of Empowerment. But I think very quickly about, like taglines, messaging, and things like that. And that's a good skill for, politics, right? So he won. I got on the zoning board at 23, and at 24, I said, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So I'm going to run for office. And I was, still living with my parents, just got my master's degree from Seton Hall. I got my new Rockports, and I walked, and I hit all the doors. And, I originally lost on election day, and I did a recount. I won the recount, and the rest is history. That election set that and my master's degree changed my life in terms of my career. So I served 2 terms on the town council in Parsippany. I was the youngest ever elected, and I love to serve. I loved it. And I lost my bid for a 3rd term. And while everybody around me was kind of upset and surprised maybe, I said, you know what? When I trust God, when one door closes, another door will open. And that's when I got the full-time job being the assistant town manager in a town called Randolph. And that's when I learned the other side of government, because, I hate to say it, but when you're an elected official, you think you know everything, but everything is handed to you. Ordinances, resolutions, agendas, correspondence. It's like you have staff, right? You have your attorney, you have your business administrator, right? But when you're the guy on the other side of the dais, you're the guy preparing all those things. And so my advantage in Randolph, or when I became the town manager in Newton 12 years ago, was that I knew how to think like an elected official. I knew what they expected. I knew what they wanted. I knew what they needed. I knew what the pressures were from the public. And that's why I've been successful on this side of the dais as much as I ever was on the other side. And a few years ago, when I moved to the town I live in now, Bernards Township, I served on the township committee here for a term. But I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the first time, because I realized it was too much politics. I enjoyed what I do full time so much that I didn't want to do it full time and part time. Like it was 24/7 politics, government meetings, and I walked away from politics years ago because politics was my drug of choice. Politics, unfortunately, became where I got adulation and attention, and I got my sense of being. And that's when the depression and the anxiety started, was when I got back into politics. And I'm not proud of that, but that's the truth. So the title of the book, There Are No Politics in Heaven, is kind of a funny thing for people, right? They laugh and say, wow, that's a great title, which, it is. It's a very catchy title. The cover of the book is very catchy, but There Are No Politics in Heaven was like me talking to myself. Like, the thing I put the most value in isn't going to come with me when I die and go to heaven, God willing, right? What do you take with you? Relationships, love, the people you impacted, the lives you've changed. You don't take your titles with you. You don't take your nameplate on a dais with you. You don't take your Rolex with you. Like, those things are temporal, right? And so I made the tough decision years ago to walk away from politics. I finished my term, and I have no desire to run again. And it was the best decision I ever made, because when I walked away from that thing that I put on a pedestal, I wrote my book. I started my consulting. I started teaching at 2 colleges. I improved my relationship with my wife, my kids. I changed my friendships, my activity. Like, I hit the reset button on my entire life. And it was all because I walked away from the thing that I thought was most important. And I realized I had such a very narrow view about what was important that God opened my eyes to a whole different world that was out there all along that I was just blind to. And that's the recovering politician, is politics was my drug.
Wow.
Which is very interesting, because we see a lot of people in other fields. We see people in the entertainment industry, which is that's their drug. Some,
right.
That may be their passion, but again, we see them doing those kind of things or other activities. And yours was politics, and I see that a lot with a lot of politicians. And here you are, big shift in your life, and
best thing that ever happened.
Making a difference. Yes.
Best thing that ever happened to me. And the reality is, and my joke in the book is, I used to have myself on the throne until God kicked me off. And it's sad, but that's how I say I used to believe my own press clippings. Like, how great am I, right? Bob, you put my bumper sticker on your car, right? That's cool. Or Sofie, you have my name on a lawn sign on your lawn. Ego, 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 right? Until you realize that when you lose an election, or you lose the title, or you walk away from it, nobody gives a damn who you are. Sad. Okay. So that's when you realize, okay, this really isn't permanent. This is temporal. This is not going to last beyond my term. This isn't going to last beyond my title. So that's why I started focusing on things of, what organizations I donate to, which ones I volunteer with, to have impact directly into lives beyond sitting on a dais and, passing resolutions. And I don't minimize what people do, because I've met a lot of great elected officials. And the way I tell it people is this: I can go to a bar and have a glass of red wine and not have an issue. But I know people that can't go near a bar because they're alcoholics. It's the same principle. So me having that title and the things that went with it, and getting into the cesspool to get elected and reelected, and the fundraisers and all that garbage, that wasn't good for me. It wasn't healthy for me. But, one of the two of you could run for office and and not have an issue, right? So that was my drug.
Well, that's true. I almost ran here in the Los Angeles area, and like you, I had handled through my company in terms of marketing and everything back in the '90s, and seeing the negativity on both sides in terms of politics, and I saw how even the people that I've helped, the negativity be beyond all that, and then everything that they had to deal with, and I said, I'm not going to put myself through that. I can make a difference in even in a more profound way without doing it through politics, and that became my path instead of doing the politics thing. So I concur with you on that, and the fact that you were able to even last as long as you did, I mean, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and one thing, and this will be kind of, for the political geeks in the audience like me, if they want to read something that's actually very interesting, was George Washington's farewell address. And there's two things he talked about in his farewell address. He talked about foreign entanglements, and he talked about the problems of political parties. And he was right. He was right on both. And where I work in Newton, we're a nonpartisan town, so politics doesn't come into play. So imagine the joy and the relief of running a town where you don't care about the politics. You just care about doing what's right and what's best for the community.
Yeah.
That's what's missing, because and politics is a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. You win, I lose.
Yep.
And so it takes out the incentive to be collaborative and engaging. And I tell people, as the town manager, I don't have the luxury to not solve problems. Why? Because I'll have 8,000 residents come to a council meeting. I get nasty emails. They write letters to the editor. They know what car I drive, or they'll bother me at the food store, because it's local, right? You have that interaction and that dynamic. When you go to Trenton or you go to Washington, no disrespect, but most of the elected officials are very removed from the day-to-day life of their constituents. And that's the problem of the system. That's why, there should be term limits, there should be no parties, and it should be about problem solving. What are the problems?
Amen.
And what are the things we need to do to solve the problems? Because in the end, and they say there's no Republican or Democrat way to fill a pothole. Either you do or you don't, right? Either you provide a service or you don't. Either you're good with money and tax dollars or you're not. It doesn't matter if there's an R or a D. You either do things the right way or you don't. And that I've been blessed that I've been able to have such a long career in elected office and appointed office, because I know how this is supposed to work. I understand the mechanics of negotiating and collaborating and building rapport and understanding and building coalitions. And, politics is a grind, and people sometimes say, gee, why doesn't government react faster and do it? It's because you don't want government to move fast, because I'm spending your money. Like, I'm spending everybody else's money. And think about it. My budget in Newton, let's say it's about $20 million or whatever. All right. So it's small compared to, billions and hundreds of millions or whatever. But the principle is the same. Am I spending your money wisely? Am I getting price quotes? Am I looking at vendors? Am I shopping around? Am I prioritizing projects, operating capital? Right.
Yep.
And like I said, just like same with law enforcement, whether you're running, Santa Barbara or Newton or El Paso, it's the same thing. It's services, it's value for the dollar. It's being respectful of the fact that you're spending other people's money. It's prioritization of projects. And in the end, it's problem solving. And that's true in any industry. I know, and I do coaching for people with jobs. And I tell people, everybody hires for the same thing. We all hire people to problem solve. I need somebody to code. I need somebody to sell. I need somebody to provide a service. I have a problem. I'm hiring you to solve the problem. So I've been blessed that I've had this career, but I also think that this was my gift, right? And I talk about in the book, I talk about the prism, and I wanted to mention this to the viewers. And older people like me, if we remember Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, right? It was the prism, right, in the triangle, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, think of the prism, and the line comes in on the left-hand side. It's gray or it's white. I said, that's the gift that God gave you, okay? I said, and it goes into the prism, but when it comes out the other side, it's a rainbow full of color. It's vibrant. It's got energy, right? That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to take the gift that God gave you, and you're supposed to push it out into the universe. And it doesn't matter if you're Christian or Muslim or a Jew or agnostic or an atheist. It's not limited by some religious construct. It's the reality that some people teach, some people cook, some people bake, some people are horticulturalists, some people are epidemiologists, politicians, podcasters, authors. Whatever it is you're good at, that's what you should be putting out into the universe. That's the value you bring to your relationships, your communities, your organizations. And that's the blessing of me doing the coaching and the book and the things I do, because I get to, and we joked about it before, but I get to empower people and encourage people. Take your gift and push it out. It's not a gift unless you give it away. So take that gift and push it out, because that's what's missing. We have too many people right now that are miserable in jobs they hate, relationships they don't like, and that's what perpetuates in the society. It's the swirl of negativity. And, I know you're going to ask me at some point, so I'm going to, jump ahead, but favorite quote, right? Things that inspire me, Psalm 118:24. Every day I start with that Psalm. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. So every day out of the gate, I start my day with an attitude of gratitude, because then that's what I push out into the universe, right? And it doesn't mean I don't experience family loss, death, relationship issues, financial issues. It doesn't mean it gives me this protection of perfection for my day. It just means that whether it's a good day or a bad day or highs and lows, I appreciate the fact that I have that day to make something with my life, right? And the other quote that always sticks with me is Henry Ford. Like, whether you think you can or you can't, you're correct. If you think you can do something, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. Like, a lot of the problem is up here. And it's connecting what's in your heart to what's in your mind, and having that relationship and that dynamic be fluid to say, I'm good at this. I'm passionate about it. This is what I want to do. And for me, it's faith in action. It's not just having the belief. It's doing the steps and the things necessary to bring about change, a better relationship, more money, healthier lifestyle, whatever it is. We all have that capability because we were designed that way. We were designed to be successful and happy and thrive. But it's really working with people to inspire them to say, be your best version of self, because this life will not last as long as you want it to. What's your legacy? What's your impact? And that's what I think people need to think about.
Thomas, very well stated, and truly addresses very core issues that are important to pay attention to, because when we do tap into our passion and use our gifts, we as a person individually will influence the collective energy, because we feel more aligned with ourselves, with our purpose, whatever it is that people really like to do, that is coming from intrinsic motivation and driven by that, is truly gonna really ignite and motivate them for their missions, and it will eliminate a lot of those things that we're having and seeing at this time, because a lot of it, like you said, they're underlayered issues that are coming out in the crisis, like during this time. And
Right.
Again, fear and love, like you're seeing a group of people that's operating out of love, not that they're not facing the same danger or risk or any of that, but their attitude and their projection is so different because of the foundation of what they're operating from. Now, based on your vision and experience, what is the most dangerous thing that you feel our country is facing currently with the dynamics that we are living at this time? We see we went from COVID to rise to this. So what do you foresee? First of all, the danger. Second, what is the solution realistically that each one of us now that can actually tap into faster? I know that, talking about being, of service and of love, those are very important ingredients. But on a practical level, like, give us an example from your point of view.
Yeah, a couple things. And you talked about collective energy, and I took some notes because I feel, and I've talked to, religious leaders, I've talked to spiritual leaders, and I read, I listen to people. I'm sure we all do. Teal Swan, Shafali Sabari, and a lot of other people. right now, this is almost a test of then this is an opportunity to raise our collective consciousness. And it's up to us whether we decide to rise to that challenge and elevate our spirituality and our love for each other, or we go in the other direction. I think, I'm not saying it's a test, but I think right now there's something going on that we're having so much disruption in 2020 from the beginning. So whether it was, Russia impeachment, United States, Russia impeachment, pandemic, protest, Lord knows what comes next in the next 90 days or 6 months. But this is an opportunity to raise that collective consciousness. So that's something I want to throw out there. As far as the dangers, there's 2 things I wrote down: ignorance and lack of civility. Because if you can't get past, if you can't be civil to one another, you're dead. You'll never improve communities. You'll never make education better. You'll never run government more efficiently. You'll never have law enforcement be respectful to people. You'll never have people open businesses and thrive and be able to afford college for their children. Like, civility is the foundation, and civility to me is an extension of love. So if you don't have that civility, you'll never get to those other places. So ignorance and lack of civility are the 2 dangers that popped into my head. And the solution, well, they always say, there's a reason why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, because we're supposed to listen more than we're supposed to talk. So I think we need to be better active listeners and not just hear people, but listen and understand, so that when groups say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean our response as white people should be, well, white lives matter too. All right. It's a good line, but there's more to the conversation than that. There's something that underlies why do they say Black Lives Matter? Because they've been oppressed. They don't have opportunity. They don't have hope. They don't have economic advantages. They're not able to access loans and capital for their businesses. They're not able to afford college, or 4-year college versus 2-year. Like, there's so many other things that go into that statement, and it doesn't require just, well, Black Lives Matter, white lives matter, all lives matter, and then that's the conversation. Like, that can't just be the conversation. We gotta get past that and get into the deeper meaning behind it. So I think being an active listener and understanding and listening to people. And the other thing is, when I was a kid growing up, I thought I was going to be governor or I was going to be president. I think everybody who takes a political science class thinks they're going to be governor, or you know what I mean? Like, that's okay. And then I realized that as much as I would have been a good governor or a good president, it was probably unlikely. And that I needed to focus on my corner of the universe. So whether it's California or Florida or New Jersey, wherever we live, or Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, where Davey is, and other people watching, we all have the ability to wake up tomorrow. Florida, by the way. Yeah, see, even Davey left Philadelphia. You understand what I'm saying, Davey? I mean, no offense, Davey.
Yeah.
But, and let's be honest, Davey went to Florida because there's no income tax in Florida. I'm not stupid, Davey. Right. But here's the reality. The reality is everybody's going to wake up tomorrow, God willing, and can have impact in their relationship with their spouse, their kids, their organization, and their community. We all have the ability. Some people can give $500 to an organization. Some people can give $5 and donate to an organization. And the most precious gift we can give people is the gift of time. And I think we all need to take a step back and say, how are we spending? We all get the same amount of hours. Sofie does, Bob does, Tom does, Davey does. How do you spend your 24 hours? How do you spend it? Personal habits, grooming, travel, commuting, eating, working. Okay, well, how do you spend your free time? Do you take time during a pandemic to text people, to call people, to video chat with people? Do you bring things to your church? Are you still donating to nonprofits? Just because you don't go to church on a Sunday right now because of the pandemic, are you still donating to them to keep them thriving? Are you checking in on your neighbors to see how they're doing? I know it sounds silly. I think we overlook the simplistic, and we overlook the things that we can do that are low cost or no cost, because all it really costs is our time. And I think that's the lesson we all need to learn. We all need to recalibrate, because you know what? And I can't speak to other towns or cities, but in New Jersey, starting in March, it's like life stopped. And so from the middle of March to, pretty recent, in June, couldn't go to certain businesses, couldn't engage in certain activities. You weren't supposed to be on the roads at certain times, et cetera, et cetera. So life became very simple. It became taking care of your immediate family in your house, right? Because you couldn't see other people. It became food shopping if you could, or you had it delivered, taking care of your pets, checking in on your parents and your friends and your neighbors, watching Netflix too much, overeating and gaining weight. Okay, guilty. But that was it. You didn't go to house of worship. There's certain stores you couldn't go into. You didn't go to theaters, movie theaters, sporting events. Like the things that you took for granted that you did on a daily basis were gone for 3 months in New Jersey. Well, maybe this is an opportunity to recalibrate your thinking and recalibrate your time, how you spend your time and what you focus on. Because what you focus on, you'll attract more of. And that's, I think, the solution. How can wake up every day, be grateful for what you have, even if, you're not going to get more of what you want if you're not grateful for what you have. So start with that attitude of gratitude and be grateful for what you have, whatever it is, good or bad. And then wake up every day and say, how can I help? How can I bring value to other people? That's how this is supposed to work. And I think that's the lesson of a pandemic and rioting and protest. How can we help?
What about the schools? The schools, how a lot of the schools are out and the kids are home. How much time more do you see that they're going to be under this kind of structure? Do you feel it's going to be a major change in our educational system due to the pandemic? Do you feel that things are going to go back like they were before in the sense of operation? What's your insight?
No, it's a great question. And actually, great timing, because I had a lunch Zoom meeting with my school superintendent in Newton today. And we talked about that. And so the way we look at it, and, he runs the schools and I run the town, but the way we look at it is this is an opportunity to rethink how we run our organizations, whether it's a town or a school district. So we don't necessarily want to go back to the way it was. And I'll give you an example. And he kind of used this example, and he's a great guy. He's, very, very bright. And he goes, traditionally in a high school environment, let's say you go to school from 7:30 to 2:30, and your classes are, let's say, 45 minutes, and it could be the same classes every day, example. But when you leave high school and you go to college, you have class twice a week. It's for an hour. You have time in between. You have more social time. It's almost like there's less structure. And he said, as an example, maybe this is an opportunity for high schools to start having schedules that are more similar to college in preparation of what students would experience going to a collegiate environment, whether it's county college or a 4-year institution. That was one example. The other thing is maybe you don't want class sizes to be the same. Maybe you want them to have different experiences. Maybe you're able to focus more on special needs children and maybe other children and in an in-person environment, but maybe other children, you want a hybrid model. Some days they go in, some days they're home. Or you have some students that are there in the morning and some students in the afternoon. Like, I hate to say it, but a crisis is an opportunity to rethink and retool how you operate. Exactly. And I think you can bring about, I'm not saying it's a justification, but you can use it as an opportunity to bring about change that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have been able to do. And so I think that's what you'll see with schools. Some will open and go back to the way they used to, but other schools will use this as an opportunity. And I'll give you another quick example. I know a little late on time, but
that's
some
fine,
of the colleges.
That's fine. This is cool.
Okay. Like I teach at Seton Hall, right? I teach graduate school. I teach 2 classes. In the fall, I teach the history of the nonprofit sector. And then in the spring, I teach leadership and management of nonprofit organizations. So I give students the history. And then the next class is I drill down. How do you do fundraising? How do you deal with board of trustees? How do you manage your mission statement, your bylaws? I get into the minutia of running a nonprofit. And Seton Hall, we go back in August. They've eliminated the fall break. The students are going to go home for Thanksgiving, and then they're done. So they're not going home and going back to campus in November. That's done. And honestly, I sat back and I said, that's not a bad model. I think it should be that way going forward, right? So once Thanksgiving hits, you go home. Maybe you have another week of instruction online. Then you do your final, and then you're home for 6 weeks for Christmas, winter break or whatever. So I think universities like Seton Hall, Notre Dame, Harvard, and others, I think that they're taking this as an opportunity to tweak how things go on campus, how they offer classes. And, I've taught classes online prior to the pandemic, and I've taught classes in person. So I'm good either way. But I just think this is an opportunity to leverage technology and leverage the opportunity. You know what I mean? It's shame on us if we don't take advantage of that. But yeah, education will look very differently, and it should, starting in September.
Exactly.
And
in fact,
is that going to affect the corporate world? Because a lot of parents who have children in school also might be working, and in the normal circumstances, they were under, you know, some people have kids under that model. Okay, we have our kids, we're both working, kids go to school, we go to work. So evidently we see that obviously the corporate world has to change too, if that changes. Or how do you foresee that being in harmony with home life for working parents?
Yeah, great question. And, you know, my wife runs a daycare center. So talk about a disruption in that industry. How do you have infants to 4-year-olds with masks 6 feet apart, social distancing? How do you have that interaction? How do you foster that creativity and growth that's required at that age that parents are paying, you know, $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, whatever it is? So yeah, and you know, I'm thinking about this as a town manager, because in the beginning I had very few employees that were able to work from home prior to the pandemic. As soon as this hit in March, I closed my building, I staggered schedules, I got laptops, you know, like I put it all into motion like the first or second week in March, because I was very aggressive. I said, this is going to be bad. I'd rather be over prepared than under prepared. And I put it all into place. And so now and to this day, I have half the employees in, half stay home. We rotate. It's a very different environment. We're looking to open on July 6th, but normally I'm open 8:30 to 4:30. Well, guess what? Employees will come in 8:30. They'll get temperature checked. For the first hour, they're going to sanitize their office area and prepare. The building will be open 9:30 to 3:30 for the public. And then the last hour of the day, they can clean up their office, do some, you know, odds and ends. So they're still working the same 8 hours, but now I've restructured how that 8 hours involves the public and vice versa, right? I think that's the type of discussion and thinking you're going to see with these corporations and businesses, because maybe I'm an employer with a 100,000 square foot building, and now I decide I only need 20,000. Maybe I can get away with, and you know, every business is different, because you have to think about the end user and the customer. Like I have a company in Newton, it's called Thor Labs, and their world headquarters is in Newton. So they have their world headquarters, but they have machine shop and things that are very hands-on. And they have a warehouse and all of that. And they're a great company. You know, it's going to be $1 billion company. It's fantastic. Like, they can't do those things at home. They have to have the machinery and the warehouse or whatever. But if you got a corporate office, if you're an insurance company or, you know, an accounting firm, lawyer, whatever, yeah, you might be rethinking. I can do some stuff at home. I can do some stuff in the office, especially because, like you said, you don't know what education is going to look like. You might need to have that flexibility. So I think, and this is key, whether we talk about, you know, women's issues or reproductive rights or pregnancy or, you know, having children, maybe I think as employees, and I've always been forward thinking, but I think a lot of my counterparts need to rethink the flexibility that they offer their employees, because now employees are really, it's not a want, it's a need now. It's a necessity to work from home and do these other things. And I've always been ahead of the curve on that, because I'm like, look, if I can get the same productivity or greater productivity at less cost, or have greater, greater enjoyment for my employees, I'm not saying I would do it every day per se, but yeah, I'm thinking about the fact that if my treasurer doesn't need to be in, maybe she can work from home. Or can my zoning officer do permits from home or the office, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm literally rethinking every department in my building. I'm adding plexiglass. I'm getting PPE. I mean, I'm doing all that practical stuff, but I'm just rethinking how they spend their time and their days. I think every organization needs to do that right now. It's an opportunity. It's not a threat.
I agree. So yeah, you mentioned earlier regarding hybrid training, because like me and Sofie, we're also in the training industry, and one of the things that we're seeing is the form of hybrid training. So you can actually have a class locally without having to travel, and have like a Zoom conference with other participants in other parts of the world. So now you're bringing them together. Same thing, I think at the college level, you can bring in an instructor or some expert from the other side of the world who maybe has some insights that can teach the class, maybe deliver a whole lesson for one day. And things have shifted. Now people are using Zoom. I know back in December, there was about 10 million people on Zoom, 10 million. And just 2 weeks ago, it jumped over 300 million people using Zoom alone, and that's skyrocketing. And I was actually one of the first adopters for Zoom many years ago.
Wow.
when they first started. Yeah. So
yeah, and one thing I want to mention that I think you'll enjoy is real quick. So my leadership of nonprofit organization class, I was scheduled to have a guest speaker come in and facilitate with me the conversation about leadership and blah blah blah. Pandemic hits, so now the classes are online, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna expand my class. I invited other people, and I'll tell you who they were because I'm telling you, it was the best thing I've ever done. I had the president of the Seeing Eye, which is world renowned for training seeing eye dogs or whatever. They're out of Morristown, New Jersey. I had a woman who's African American, who's unbelievable, who is a detective at the Morris County Prosecutor's Office. I had a state senator from the Newton area who is a great elected official. And then I had a gentleman who used to run the hospital in Newton who retired in December, and then he volunteered to run a field hospital in Chicago for the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, I had I had the Tonight Show of guests, right? And I'm sitting there and I got my headset on, and I had my best friend who runs the Annenberg School of Journalism out in California. I had him on. I had the woman who's a councilwoman in Newton who does fundraising for Jersey Battered Women's Service. I had my students. I had other people, and it was 2.5 hours of people sharing about leadership, communications. And I'm sitting there and I just had a grin on them. I had a grin the whole time. I'm sitting here like, this is the best thing I've ever done, because the technology gave me that opportunity to have that, right? I mean, Joe took a break from the field hospital in Chicago to be on the call. Gordon, Dr. Stables, he's out at the Annenberg School of Journalism at USC. Most of us were in New Jersey. I had somebody from Indiana on the call. I mean, and I'm just sitting there like, I hope the students appreciate the wisdom and the knowledge that these people are giving them in this class. And, it was fantastic. And we did it through Microsoft Teams because that's what Seton Hall uses. But you're right. Like you said, you could do things in person, but now you can start pulling in people from other sectors, other groups. I'm going to have a call next week. There's a company that's doing fiber optic technology in Newton, right? Private company. But Dr. Green, the school superintendent, and I are going to talk to him to see how we can facilitate a greater expansion of fiber optics throughout the town for the businesses, the residents. And, we have a lot of low income students. And think about it. They might not have access. They might not have technology. Yep. And we just forced them for the past 3 months to do all their assignments at home. They can't get to a library. They can't get to a friend's house or a neighbor's house because they can't go out or they got a social distance. So even something like that, how do we deliver technology and resources to the underserved communities so that we can even equalize that playing field? Because even that would make a difference for education and training and careers. And those are the things, when government in Washington talks about loans and grants, like investing in, and that's one of the things I think President Trump is right on, investing in infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, but bandwidth and fiber optic and technology, that's where you see a big gap right now between populations and ethnic groups and communities is I have multiple options where I live, right? Fiber optic, Fios, Cablevision, and there are communities that are still using, some version of dial-up, some version of technology. You know what I mean? And I'm being facetious, but you kind of get my point. So I think technology, not just hardware and software, but the infrastructure to support it. I think those are the conversations we should be having more of right now because of the long-term potential.
Yeah, we definitely need a larger internet backbone throughout parts of the area that just don't have it, and expand it out with a fiber optic cable that
Right.
will help to deliver like what we're doing right now. Because a
Right.
lot of people are not able to do what we're doing right now. And on top of that, if they have it, and you can use Zoom, or you can use Jitsi Meet. I don't know. Have you heard of Jitsi Meet?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. So you've heard of Google Meet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jitsi Meet is better than that. So if you don't have Zoom, I'm gonna suggest people use Jitsi Meet. So JITSI Meet. You can actually Google that. It's a free application,
Wow.
which is it has doesn't have all the bells and whistles of Zoom, but it's a next best thing. So I'm gonna
Wow.
suggest people to
Great.
do that. And yeah, so it's just, yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, we need to build in the infrastructure. Very, very important. And if we can do that and level the playing field. And I'm going to ask you another question.
Sure.
So the last 4 presidents of the United States, from Clinton to Bush to Obama to Trump, are all part of my generation. 2 of them have been impeached, of my generation. So, you know, I hate to say that my generation is kind of like failed everybody else. So you're Gen Xer, just like Sofie.
Yeah.
And if you were president of the United States, and if you like, if I were to give you the top 3 things that you would do or take charge of, what would be those top 3 things?
That's a great question. And, you know, it's sad that I never really looked at it from that perspective of what it's been like since, I guess, 92, right? When Clinton got elected. We haven't had a
baby boomer generations. Yes.
Yeah, last 28 years.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I always focus on, I'm just going to write these down. All right. So, you know, I come from, my philosophy of government as a conservative Republican is less is more. Okay. And what I mean by that is the way the system of government was set up 200 years ago, it was never meant for the federal government to be the bloated bureaucracy it's become. It wasn't intended that way, because a bureaucracy in Washington can never deliver services as effectively as the local or the county or the state. It doesn't work, right? And you see it now, right? You have a pandemic, you have certain messages that come out of Washington, good or bad. But in the end, who managed the pandemic? Honestly, it was really the 50 states, right? What went on in New York and New Jersey was very different than what went on in Hawaii and Alaska or North Dakota or Oklahoma, right? So you see, and you know, I had this discussion with one of my colleagues at Seton Hall the other day when there was a civic boot camp that I was a speaker at online, and it's this whole federal system of government, right? It's not just the federal government. We're 50 states, right? We have 50 different sets of rules. We're 50 different elections. I mean, it's a whole different thing. And so I think understanding what's the basic function of the federal government, right? It's military, it's certain maybe environmental, it's certain other things. The rest needs to be focused at the state level, because what you need in California might be very different than what Sofie needs in Florida or New Jersey or because different cultures, different people, different. It's just different. So I look at finances and I look at taxes. You know, I'm a numbers guy, right? So I look at what do the tax policies that we have incentivize businesses and growth and opportunity, or do they take that incentive away? And I would say right now our tax system is still too onerous. I've always been a big proponent of a flat tax. I don't think people should be penalized because they make more money. I think you should have a certain threshold maybe underneath where there's no taxation, and then above that it's a flat tax. So whether you make 50,000 or 100, you know what? It's an incentive for people to work harder. So I would do a flat tax. That's something I've always been a big proponent of. Education. I've always been a big proponent of federal standards for education, and I know that drives my conservative friends off the wall. But maybe that's an area where you do want a certain level of knowledge, especially because the United States is getting killed when it relates to science, technology, the STEM programs. Like, we're so far behind these other countries in STEM, and now they call STEAM, right? You add arts into it. Like, we're very much behind in those things. So maybe the federal government can do more in that area, because technology drives all of these industries now. Even things like retail and service industries are driven by computers and technology and point of sale systems and all these things. Whereas years ago, you could get away with being ignorant about technology. Now you can't afford to be ignorant about technology. So I think the federal government could invest in education more in that regard. And I think, the federal government needs to have standards as it relates to law enforcement. I think that's the timely issue right now. I wish the Attorney General and the President would do more in that regard, and maybe they are. Maybe I'm not, privy to that, but I think they need to set the standard nationally, because I think we're seeing a breakdown of what I think the Attorney General in New Jersey is doing is great. I can't speak to the rules and regulations in Minneapolis or Minnesota or some of these other cities, right? So maybe we need to have a greater conversation about race relations and law enforcement and the nexus between the two, because I think right now, we're seeing that there's a gap somewhere, and I think we need to fill that gap and be honest and have that conversation. So I would say finances, taxes, education, and law enforcement and training. I think those are things where, and like I said in the beginning, I supported President Trump. I'll support him in this election too. But I think when you have the bully pulpit and you have the opportunity to be at that level, every time you give a speech, you have an opportunity, you have a gift, you have a blessing to be able to inspire people. And that's one of the things I always admired about Ronald Reagan and Tom Kaine and a lot of other elected officials. When they spoke, it moved you. And I wasn't a big Obama supporter, full disclosure. But you can't question the man's ability to motivate people and inspire people, right? I mean, you can't question that. Same thing with Clinton, right? I didn't vote for President Clinton, and I've met him in person. I met actually, several presidents and other elected officials in person. Like, you can't question President Clinton's ability to speak, motivate, his charm, his charisma. He just had that, and it was sincere and it was genuine. I don't have to agree with his policies to say those things. And I think that's where President Trump needs to step up. I think that's where a lot of the governors need to step up. Our words can destroy, or our words can inspire. And so I think every time we speak, we need to inspire, we need to breathe love into people. And I think that's, I could talk about policies, and, I think I would be a good negotiator because I understand the art of negotiation, having dealt with unions and police unions and all of that. And I think a lot of what Washington is, I hate to say, it's give and take. It's trade-offs, right? You want this, I want that. And it's understanding how to maneuver. But I think I would use my time as president to inspire people. I would want that to be my legacy. I would want it to be ethical leadership. I want it to be inspiring leadership.
Beautiful.
And time for Gen X president, I think. I need to pass but yeah, and I need to say my generation has done enough. Pass it to the next generation. So I think it's time for Gen X to.
I wish I could take the mantle, but my wife won't let me, Bob. So unfortunately.
Thomas, just before we're past the time, but one thing I would like to ask you, seeing introverted people probably would be very okay with a lot of things that are happening because by nature they're homey or they like to be alone and all that. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, we have a lot of extroverted people who are actually suffering from mental health issues a lot mm-hmm. because of the pandemic. And now that possibly the school systems might change to less interaction, and possibly I know of a friend who works on a telephone. They do telesales. Their whole company is moving for home. Like they are switching permanently already.
Yeah, sure.
And so do you feel that we need to address more if we're moving towards that direction, to have social activities for corporations who are having their employees at home. So they have, those who are very extroverted, who like to go out for work and meet people and do that. And now, because of their consumption being home for many hours of the day, trying to do the work and being in just one space, seeing the same thing, the same walls, it might not be as fun for them in their health wise. So,
Right.
So I really feel that we need to bring that to a very big attention by choice, because the introverted people might be so happy, and that might be annoying for them to even socialize more. They're like, yeah, this is great, and we're happy. But to meet halfway of being realistic, then maybe some specific programs for schools or corporations for, after or in between, by, like what suggestions of that nature would help. Do you feel that this would be like a very necessary thing to add into their regimen?
Yeah, I'm just making a quick note. Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two issues that, I wrote down as you were speaking. So the first one is there's a couple issues that I don't know people are really aware of that have gone on during the pandemic that will be challenging for us going forward. The first is the fact that there's been a tremendous increase in the number of domestic violence incidents.
Yes.
And I see it from the law enforcement perspective with my police department. I hate to say it, but people aren't used to this much time together. There's maybe unresolved issues in relationships or tension about things that wasn't dealt with, or maybe was kind of pushed to the side. And now you're forcing people to have that interaction that they don't want, or they're not used to. So you have an uptick in the number of domestic violence calls. So that's something I think as a society we're going to have to address, because that's going to be a problem for marriages, children, communities, etc. So
Exactly.
The second issue is there are a lot of people suffering emotionally and mentally that are not getting help. They're not taking advantage of telehealth services. Maybe they don't have access to certain services because they're used to public health services, and they physically can't access them right now because things are closed. We can't go out, etc. So I think anxiety and depression, and you can see the statistics. Everything's through the roof right now. I mean, there's certain antidepressants and certain drugs they can't even keep on the shelves because they're being prescribed so fast and they're going out. So I think we're going to have to address mental health, and I think that's probably another issue I would add to my list. When you talked about as president, being able to have an open and honest conversation about mental health issues and getting rid of the stigma related to those things. And that's why I wrote a book about it. It wasn't easy for me as a town manager writing a book about thinking about killing myself 5 years ago, or having thoughts of anxiety and depression, because on the surface you would have thought my life was perfect. Well-paid job, great benefits, great wife, great kids, great pets, nice home, acre of property, blah, 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 blah. But that doesn't mean internally I wasn't going through turmoil and I didn't know how to address it. Thank God, counseling, Christian therapy, whatever, all the things I did that I talk about in the book. But there are a lot of people right now that don't have resources, or they don't know where to turn, or they're embarrassed. So I think we really need to be conscious, because I think we're going to lose a lot of people, either mentally, emotionally, or actually they're going to kill themselves because they don't know how to manage the pandemic, the rioting, the protests, their finances.
Their emotions.
And they're still trying to get unemployment from March. I mean, you know what I mean? Like their whole world has been upside down. Like, thank God I still have income and I'm still functioning. But I think I'm more the exception than the norm right now, right? And I'm blessed. But so I think mental health issues, we got to have that broader conversation. And then your other point about socialization, as human beings, we were designed to be tribal. We were designed to be in groups. We were designed to interact with people. And as much as I love my daughters are 21 and 20 years old. And I'm sure if I go upstairs right now when we're done, they're going to be on this. They're going to be doing this. And we all do it, and we all text, and we check social media, right? But there's a time and a place for that. But there needs to be a time and a place for communal things like houses of worship, organizations, volunteerism, entertainment, sports, arts, and things like that. So yeah, I think as organizations, we need to be very cautious that what might work in terms of an efficiency of the bottom line doesn't alienate other members of our staff who are going to be isolated, lonely, not feel part of a team, lose the ability to communicate effectively, because people that are keyboard warriors and can type or can text might be very different than people that can give a presentation in front of 500 people or 1,000, or right. So we need to encourage both skill sets, the soft skills and the hard skills, the technology and the teamwork and the ability to interact. Because I'm bringing my employees back, but I hate to say it this way, but I want them to learn how to integrate again, how to be collaborative, how to be comfortable. I'm going to have employees wearing masks. I'm going to have staff, visitors wearing masks. Like, it's going to be awkward, but I think we can't lose sight of our humanity and the fact that we need to maintain some connection, because honestly, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, it's very easy to stay in your pajamas, sleep late, overeat, use the laptop, use Zoom, take the dog out 12 times a day like I do sometimes because he loves it. Right? He thinks pandemic's fantastic. But
I know our pets love this.
It's like, oh my God. But you know what? But that doesn't mean that that's healthy for our soul or our mental and emotional well-being. So we need to be conscious of all of that. But that, and you talked about it in the beginning, it's the holistic approach, right? It's mind, body, and soul. It's not just economics. It's not just a paycheck or benefits. I
feel that. I feel that if it's so refreshing talking to you, and I'm so happy that you gave us time today on our show, because when people in authority and in areas where they have influence, and those same leaders think holistic, and if collectively we can all be on that same vibe, much can be accomplished, and less damage, less people committing suicide. It doesn't have to be the other way. And there has to be better solutions. And there are better solutions. It's just a matter of being grounded as we pursue taking action, because that stage in the transition is very crucial, and it needs very strong leaders to handle this much of people who've been so frustrated. And like you said, the evidence, like domestic violence. True, because I had a false alarm in my house, and the cops came. They came the first time ever I lived and had a false alarm. They came so late. They came an hour some change, which never ever was the case. And the guy was telling me because they had a lot of domestic violence issues. Because I told them, oh, is it like, I'm thinking, robberies because of the COVID, I'm just trying to make sure what's going in the area. And he literally said domestic violence. And I was like, wow, like I would have never thought, that it would be that noticeable in such a short period of time. Mind you, this has been a short period of time compared to countries who are under war and real curfews for months and years sometimes. And think about it that for a month or two.
And think about it this, and just to extrapolate that one particular point. You're a domestic violence agency, and let's say you operate some sort of a shelter. So typically you have, X number of people, women and children, although it could be men, right? A lot of agencies are offering more services for men now too. Pandemic hits, calls for domestic violence incidents goes up. Your shelter is now full. You're still getting calls for service, and you still need, you still need to house people. Where are you going to put them? And that was the virtue of having Helen, one of my council people who does, the fundraising for the Battered Women's Agency in Morris County. She talked about the fact that now you got to build relationships with other agencies, or maybe now you need to reach out to collaboration. But think about it. Now maybe you need to reach out to hotels that are empty because of the pandemic, but maybe they have, hotel rooms.
And there has been some hotels who actually volunteered their space. I know the Marriott here in Orlando did for the COVID, so that we're hearing all that, and you'd be like, wow, like this is
But, you know, that's a good example of crisis exacerbates something going on in society. So it forces the nonprofit or the organization to be creative and build these relationships so that people don't suffer in silence, which is unfortunately a lot of times, whether it's domestic violence or mental health issues, a lot of people will keep those things internally and suffer in silence, and we can't allow that to happen anymore. So
yep. Yeah, and I think it comes back down to, because like I was about to spin it back around, and you already mentioned the humanity of it, and getting back to what you said earlier, that we all need to listen and understand each other, and even in the midst of being able to collaborate, that before anything like this happens, before we have a pandemic and whatever happens even in the future, we all need to be able to come together and develop the human relationships with each other so we can support and to grow. And if you can develop a connection, let's say something happens and you already have that human to human connection with somebody, let's say what Sofie mentioned, with somebody who runs Marriott. So we can utilize those resources or other resources. But again, it stems from what you said, and what you said throughout this interview. It's all based on humanity and how we all come together in terms of that way.
Yeah, and you know, my last thought on that is it's about acceptance, and it's about understanding what we have in common rather than what differentiates us. Because if we're always going to sit here and say rich, poor, black, white, Jew, Gentile, or you know whatever, it separates us, right? It's me versus you. It's Republican, Democrat. It's liberal, conservative. If we're always segmenting people, or we're trying to put them in these little boxes, you negate their humanity. You take that away from them. So we need to put these labels aside and say, okay, human to human. You know, I hate to oversimplify it, but good person, bad person, respectful, not loving, not. I mean, like. Let's bring love to the table. Let's bring love to the game, and let's have that human relation and connection, because that's the way we were designed. And I don't just mean from a procreation standpoint. We were designed to interact and to be loving to one another. And you know, one thing that I say in my book, you know, God's more interested in your character than your comfort. So you might find yourself in uncomfortable situations like we are right now in society, but maybe that's because God wants us to elevate our character and our integrity, and this is an opportunity through strife and the challenges that we're experiencing. Maybe we all need to do a little bit more for each other, and that's the true test of character that we're experiencing right now.
Fantastic. And I think I'm going to leave it on that note, because I think we've come down to I actually went over a little bit. I love that ending, and I can see why people would want you either consulting or coaching. So let's say somebody wants to bring you either as a speaker, a coach, a consultant, or otherwise. What would be the best way to get a hold of you?
Sure. I appreciate that. So my website is nopoliticsinheaven.com, so they can check out my website.
Which there is a link, by the way, in the description here.
Okay, thank you. And my book is available on Amazon, so they could take a look at the book. And then I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I have about 25,000.
Also, you can put the link of the book on the comments, Bob, so that people can.
You can.
I have about 25,000 connections on social media, and my strongest platform is LinkedIn, just because that's a business, more professional platform. So. People can email me, they can reach out to me through social media, or they can engage with me on the website. But yeah, like you said, I think you can tell I have fun with this. I mean, I run a town for a living.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I'll probably sleep with this headset on, because, I love doing this. But, it is what it is. But, I just enjoy.
See, Sofie, you see, he has a headset. I'm telling you, Sofie, get a headset.
Got to get a headset. But, but it's like, look. Life is short and life is precious, and the fact that I'm able to write a book, teach at 2 great colleges, and that are actually both religious, so that means something to me spiritually, and the fact that I started a consulting business and I can coach people I can go into organizations and do SWOT analysis, or I can do leadership coaching. Like,
You're a polymath.
I'm just, I mean, think of all the interest, and the two of you, like, think of all the interesting people I've met because I walked away from politics 3 years ago and 5 years. I mean, think of the doors that God has opened, because I said, it's almost like, you know how we went from really bad TVs, and then we had plasma TVs and LCDs and LEDs, and now we got, 4K and 8K. Like, that's what my life has been. It's like every year God has widened my perspective and my horizon and opened very interesting doors. And opening those doors has been a blessing, because I've met interesting people like the two of you that otherwise I would have never encountered. And I mean that sincerely. Like,
Likewise.
This is a great thing. And I hopefully, somebody will pick up on at least one thing I said that meant something, that resonated with them, and they'll use that to make changes in their, marriage, or the relationship with their kids, or their community, or their career. Because I think we can all breathe life into people and inspire people if we choose to. And I'm just fortunate that I have these platforms to be able to do it.
Great, thank you. And before you go, I want to tell everybody, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed, smash the subscribe button. And yeah, do that. And Thomas, or Mr. Russo, or what should we call you? The Emperor of Empowerment, because
Good.
you've empowered people today.
Good, right?
So
Actually, that's a very nice one. I love it.
I'm gonna go I'm gonna trademark it before somebody does. So just warning everybody. I'm using this video as proof of authorship. So don't everybody.
There you go.
And don't go to GoDaddy.com and buy the URL either, people. Okay, so relax.
So the Emperor of Empowerment, the Sultan of Spirituality, owns both. So
amen.
Amen. And thank you, Thomas,
for
honored
to have that declared by the first time on this show, blessing everyone. So that's pretty cool.
Again, thank you, Thomas, for being here, and I want to thank everybody else for tuning in, and especially Davey with all the comments. And he did leave one earlier, said just addressing to you, Thomas. Love you too. Boy, that was tough to say.
Yeah, see, he had to bite his tongue telling a guy from New Jersey who's a diehard Ranger fan that he loves me, but it's okay. That means I made progress tonight with somebody like Davey, so that's a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's amazing how these platforms truly open up great connections. And a lot of the times, even though our show is very simple and very cozy and in our own community, but because of the love that's in it and the genuine, sincere reasoning of why we're doing it, it has really gotten a lot of people connected, and it's just amazing. And we hear about this and it's like, oh my God, we met them on your show, or I'm like, wow. And that's the whole idea is about really getting out there, knowing more of each other, connecting, getting more familiar of what each person does, and then know more about them, be interested in them. Right. If they have missions that they're doing that are very noble, let's support that mission. Let's all cheer up for them. Let's encourage them. Let's all be collectively empowering one another. And this is really wonderful. And we're very happy that you are part of our community, and you are such a blessing to many. You lead by such a great example. And truly, I like that you preach what you do, and that's very, very important to have that integrity and to be authentic and to be very sincere, and that really radiates and projects in the way you are and who you are and what you've been doing. So thank you again, and many blessings to you.
Thank you both. I appreciate your time.
And by the way, before you go, I want to give a shout out to my co-host here, Sofie Nubani, for what she's done and her upcoming book also coming out, Optimize Your Creative Mindset. And go to SofieNubani.com, because she is offering coaching, helping to make a difference, and along with Thomas, and what he's doing, the Emperor of empowerment. So go get empowered by the Emperor. Yes, there. Yes.
Amen. Amen. Wow.
Amen.
I'm very impressed. Let me tell you, Thomas, when I shared the LinkedIn view, I couldn't put everything because you know how they give you very limited space. And I was like, wow, there's so much of what you do. And that's very impressive. And, you know, you're all for education. I love that. I really believe that when we're informed, when we're educated, we can make better decisions. And we have more self-confidence because we feel more familiar. We feel more safe. We feel that we can interact better and be better. And you are living that example for such a long time and since a very young age. I mean, to run at 24, and I mean, that is really amazing. And honestly, I didn't know a lot of things about you till later. And I was like, wow, this is really nice. And to see you that you're in position of influence and authority with such a kinder, loving, kind heart, that really makes the whole difference. And like you said, then the titles all go. And what we leave as a legacy is our reputation and the difference that we made and impacted in other people's lives. And that's what you're doing. And we are so grateful for that. So blessings to you. And thank everybody on my behalf, Wisdom Cafe, for you guys being part of our journey and our progress. And please feel free to connect with all our guests, to find out more about them, to read their books, to learn from their experience, their growth, you know, their trials and tribulations, so you can cut a lot of the things that you might not need to have to go through yourselves. Like Tom was talking about depression and anxiety, that's deep stuff. We are suffering a lot as a country from such things. And to see how amazing he is and what he's doing, you know, what got him to be here, you know, so go grab that book and learn more about it. So
absolutely,
you can help somebody else too. Maybe it's not you, maybe it's someone else, you know. So let's be the change in this world.
Yes. Amen. And again, the link to his website is in the description. Go there right now, check it out. It's really awesome. And you'll see the Ballad of Life. I like the way that just pops up right there. Yeah. So again, want to thank everybody for tuning in. And Thomas, you're the guy.
All right, thank you, sir.
Of empowerment.
I appreciate it. Thank you both very much.
Blessings.
Okay. Blessings. Bye, everybody. Blessings.
Bye. Bye.